Just let her go. That was what my father said to the doctor. While I was in a coma, my whole body covered with tubes, my heart beating strong then weak, and my life hanging only by a few cold beeping sounds in the intensive care room. He said that sentence in a way that was frighteningly concise. No trembling voice, no hesitation. Not like a father standing before the line between life and death of his own daughter. It sounded like the way people cancel a monthly subscription. Cold, neat, decisive. My name is Emma Carter. I am 29 years old. I am a nurse. And the most painful thing in my life was not the accident that left me in a coma for 3 weeks. The most painful thing was that when I woke up, I discovered that the first person who wanted me to die was my own father, Victor Carter. But if you think that was the cruelest part, then no. The cruelest part was that while I was lying motionless on the hospital bed, he took the opportunity to steal the only thing in this world that my grandmother Jasmine Carter had left for me. And he thought he had won. He forgot one thing. I can stay silent for a very long time. I can endure for a very long time. But once I am able to stand up, I will not let anyone bury me alive one more time. To understand why everything reached that point, I have to go back earlier. Back to the day my grandmother Jasmine passed away. Because in truth, everything did not begin with the accident. It began a long time before that, from when I was just a child and had already understood that in my own home. I had never been loved equally. I was born with a congenital heart condition. At the age of 4, I went into surgery. The operation lasted more than 10 hours. I do not remember the pain from that day, but I remember very clearly the price of it, because my father repeated it throughout my childhood as if it were a debt I had to repay for my entire life. Do you know how much money you've cost this family? The first time he said that, I was 8 years old. I had only asked for a new pair of shoes because the soles of my old ones had cracked, and every time it rained, my socks were soaked. He sat at the kitchen table, in front of a stack of old hospital bills, not even bothering to look up at me. You've cost this family more than $200,000. Don't ask for anything else. I did not get a new pair of shoes. From that moment on, I gradually learned how not to ask for anything anymore. At 12, I held myself back. At 15, I babysat around the neighborhood to buy my own school supplies. At 18, I signed my student loan alone, while my brother Daniel Carter had his tuition paid, had his own car, birthday parties at restaurants, gifts of every kind. Daniel was always the pride. And I was a walking bill. My mother, Elaine Carter, was not as cruel as my father, but her silence was colder than any scolding. She saw everything. She knew everything. She just never stood on my side. Some children grow up with praise. Some children grow up in warm embraces. I grew up with the feeling that I had to apologize just for being alive. And strangely, back then I never resisted. That is what many people do not understand when they hear my story. Why did I endure for so long? Because when a lie is repeated over and over again for decades, it starts to feel like the truth. I truly believed that I owed this family. I believed my existence was a burden. I believed I had to live quietly, obediently, and repay them by not causing trouble. The only person who never treated me like a debt was my grandmother Jasmine. 3 months after my grandmother Jasmine's funeral, I finished a night shift at the hospital. At that time it was 4:17 a.m. I remember that number very clearly because while driving through Brook Hollow, I glanced at the clock and calculated how many hours I could sleep before my next shift. 6 hours if I skipped breakfast. 5 hours if I still took a shower. I hadn't finished calculating when a pickup truck ran a red light and crashed straight into the driver's side. I don't remember the sound of the impact. I don't remember the glass shattering. I only remember a very strong sensation, like my whole body was bent in half. After that, everything went blank. I was taken to the very hospital where I worked. Brain swelling, broken ribs, internal bleeding, emergency surgery. The first surgery kept me alive, but the bleeding had not completely stopped. The doctors needed another surgery, needed deeper specialists, needed more time, and needed someone to sign consent. I was not married. I had no children. My old records still listed my father, Victor Carter, as my emergency contact because many years earlier he had forced me to fill it in that way. I used to think that was care. No. That was the string he held to control me, until the very last moment. The hospital called him at 10:30 p.m. He arrived at 10:47. I knew those exact timestamps later, because everything was recorded. And the first thing he did when he arrived was not to ask if I was still alive, not to ask how much pain I was in, not to ask if his daughter was afraid. He went straight to the financial department. Then he asked only one question: how much will this cost? The person who told me this was not a stranger. It was Evelyn Moore, the head ICU nurse, who had worked at the hospital for nearly 30 years. She had a memory as sharp as a knife and was the kind of person who did not speak much, but once she spoke, she was not wrong by a single word. She was standing at the desk when my father came out of the financial office and met the surgeon in charge of my case. My father asked for a cost estimate. The doctor answered, about $180,000 to $240,000, depending on complications. Insurance would cover part of it, but the remaining portion was still very large. He heard it, and his expression barely changed. Then he said, "She doesn't have medical authorization. I'm her father. I decide." The doctor nodded. According to procedure, if there is no designated medical proxy, the closest relative has the right to sign. And then my father said the sentence that I will never forget for the rest of my life, no matter how much I want to. "Just let her go. We will not pay for another surgery." He added another sentence even colder. "She has been a financial burden on this family since the day she was born." Then he signed the do not resuscitate order. He signed firmly. No hesitation, no trembling, no doubt. When he finished, he put the pen down, asked if there were any more documents to sign, then walked straight to the elevator. He did not come in to look at me even once. He did not stand outside the glass door. He did not say goodbye. He did not hold my hand. No, he signed for me to die and went home to sleep. But there was one thing he did not know. 3 years earlier, when I started working at the hospital, I had quietly designated my medical proxy as Olivia Bennett, my best friend from nursing school. I had never told my family, because deep down, there were things I had never truly trusted them with. Evelyn opened my employee file and found that document within minutes. She called Olivia at 11:14 p.m. Olivia did not ask much. She only said, "I'm coming." It was raining. Late at night. She drove nearly an hour and a half, arrived at the hospital close to 1 a.m., bringing her identification and a copy of the authorization document she kept at home. Olivia immediately canceled the DNR, signed consent for surgery. The doctors returned to the operating room that same night. Meanwhile, my father was sleeping peacefully at home, thinking the hospital would call the next morning to inform him that his daughter did not make it. No one called him. Evelyn did one more thing. She made an internal report, recording exactly every word my father said, every timestamp, every signature, and even the fact that he intentionally lied about me not having a medical proxy. That report later became the evidence that shattered the image he had built for years. But my father had not made his last mistake, because the next morning, instead of calling the hospital, instead of coming to see if I was alive, he went to do something else. He went to steal my grandmother Jasmine's house. And that was when the second family secret began to reveal itself. There was one thing during that entire time that I did not know at all. My grandmother Jasmine had made a separate will, not through the family's usual lawyer, not through anyone my father could interfere with. She quietly went to a lawyer named Adrian Cole. 2 years before she passed away, she had transferred the house in Willow Creek into my name legally. At the same time, she left me a separate savings account. No conditions. No equal division. No, the whole family shares. Just one clear sentence. Belongs to Emma Carter. And she did that not because she loved Daniel less, not because she hated my father, but because she knew exactly what would happen if she did not protect me. My father did not know about that. What he knew was, she had passed away, the house was empty, and if he acted quickly, he could take it all before I understood anything. He forged a power of attorney. He forged my signature. He brought it to a familiar notary, someone willing to close their eyes and stamp it. Then he submitted documents to transfer the house into his name. Just a few days later, he used that very house as collateral to withdraw $280,000 in cash. That money was not used for my hospital bills, not used to pay my student loans, not saved for my recovery. Later, I found out my father was drowning in gambling debt. A man who spent his life going to church talking about morality, sacrifice, and fatherly love secretly took his own mother's house to cover dirty debts that no one in the neighborhood, in the church, or in society knew about. But forged documents only stand as long as no one looks closely. And then I woke up. The hospital lights when I opened my eyes were harsh white. My throat burned like fire. My ribs hurt every time I breathed. My left arm was wrapped. Everything felt heavy like lead. The first person I saw was Evelyn Moore. Not my father. Not my mother. Not Daniel. Evelyn pulled a chair beside my bed, held my hand, and said slowly, "You're safe now. But there are some things you need to know." That day, I did not have enough strength to hear everything. On the second day after waking up, my father finally appeared. He walked into the room with a perfectly emotional face, red eyes, trembling voice, holding my hand, lowering his head. "Oh, my dear, the whole family was so worried. Thank God you woke up. If you have ever worked in the ICU like I have, you understand that some faces you can tell immediately whether they are real or fake. The fear of losing someone and the fear of being exposed look very different." I looked at him. I knew. But I still said, "Hello, Dad." I needed him to believe that I knew nothing. 2 more days passed. When the hallway was empty, Evelyn told me everything. Every word, every sentence, every moment my father signed the paper to let me die. After listening, I did not cry immediately. I just felt all the pieces of my childhood suddenly locking into place. Finally, the feeling of being a burden had a clear shape. I asked Evelyn to bring me my phone. 32 missed calls from my father. 11 from Daniel. A few cold messages asking about me like procedures. I ignored all of them. I scrolled down to a name my grandmother had once mentioned, Adrian Cole. He answered after 2 rings. Before I could finish saying my name, he said gently, "Emma, I've been looking for you for 4 months." I tightened my grip on the phone. Adrian said my grandmother had completed all legal procedures long ago. The Howells, the money, the will, documents, everything was fully legal. He had sent certified letters to me, but they were returned. He had called, but someone answered saying I had moved to another state and did not want to be contacted. I knew immediately who that was. My father. I told Adrian I was in the hospital, had just woken from a coma. He was silent for a moment, then said he would check the property records immediately. Less than an hour later, he called back. His voice had completely changed. "Emma, the house was transferred out of your name 3 weeks ago. The recipient is Victor Carter, based on a power of attorney." I said calmly, "I never signed any power of attorney." "I believe you," Adrian replied, "and I think it was forged." Then he read me every detail. The filing date, notary code, the $280,000 mortgage, the bank holding it. I wrote everything down. When Adrian asked if I wanted to call the police immediately, I said, "Not yet. I want to know how deep he has gone." He hesitated slightly, then added, "Your grandmother left you a letter. She instructed that it must be handed to you personally." I put the pen down. "Can you come tomorrow?" 9 in the morning. I hung up and sat for a long time staring at the hospital ceiling. My grandmother had seen everything. She saw I would be betrayed. She saw the house would be targeted. She even prepared someone to protect me. An old woman, living quietly in a house filled with lavender scent, was the only one in this family who thought ahead for me until the very end. That was when I understood. A family secret is not just a hidden secret. Sometimes it is the truth that an old woman carried in her heart for many years, because she knew that if it was revealed too early, the whole family would collapse. The next morning, Adrian Cole arrived at the hospital on time. He was not as tall as I had imagined. His hair was streaked with gray, a gray suit, an old leather briefcase, the kind of person who spoke little but made others trust him. He placed a cream-colored envelope on my blanket. On the outside, there was only one line, written in a slightly trembling but still clear handwriting. "Emma." I opened the letter with fingers that were still slightly shaking from pain. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. I had just read the first line when my eyes began to sting. "Emma, I know your father will try to take everything. He has done that for many years with my pension, with my savings, with things I kept silent about because I was afraid the family would fall apart. That was my mistake. Do not repeat that mistake. The house is yours. The money is yours. Adrian has all the documents. Do not let anyone take it from you, even your father,
See,
especially
sun
your
is going
father.
down.
You are stronger than I think. In fact, you have always been stronger than I thought, I cried. That was the first time I cried since I woke up. Not because I was weak, but because for the first time in my life, someone had seen all of my wounds and still chose to stand on my side. Adrian waited for me to calm down, then opened his briefcase and took out documents one by one. The original will, court records, house transfer documents, mortgage records created by my father. Everything was clean, legal, and clear. He asked me, "How do you want to handle this?" I sat up straighter, even though my ribs hurt sharply. "I want to do this properly, and I want it done before Sunday." Why Sunday? Because Sunday is community service at the church, and my father will stand in front of the microphone like always, telling everyone how much he loves his family. Adrian looked at me for a few seconds. Then he nodded. "All right." At that moment, if you are listening to this story and feel something tight in your chest, you will understand that feeling. There are wounds that do not bleed, but they eat into your self-worth for decades. If you have ever been overlooked in your own family, leave a comment. I truly want to know if you have ever had to stand up alone like this. Then I returned to the story. 5 days after waking up, I was discharged from the hospital. My father came to pick me up with his familiar kind face. He brought a suitcase and spoke as if giving an order. "You will go home with us until you recover." I smiled. "Olivia is coming to pick me up. I'll stay with her for now." His face stiffened slightly. "You'd rather stay with an outsider than your family?" "Olivia is not an outsider. She has been my medical proxy for 3 years." I saw his eyes freeze for a brief second. He might not have fully understood yet, but he had begun to sense that he had missed something. That night, Daniel texted me, accusing me of being ungrateful. I did not reply. I sat in Olivia's kitchen, together with Adrian, reconstructing the entire timeline: the night of the accident, the time the DNR was signed, the day the power of attorney was forged, the day the house was transferred, the day the mortgage was taken, the legal filings, the bank notification, the police report. Everything was prepared before Sunday. That night my father called. His voice sounded strangely normal, trying to maintain the image of a concerned father. "About your grandmother Jasmine's house. I'm handling it. Don't worry. I'll explain when you're better." He was testing me. I replied softly, "Yes, thank you, Dad." After hanging up, Olivia looked at me. "How can you stay so calm?" I gave a faint smile. "Because I've been practicing living with disappointment about him for nearly 30 years. That Sunday, I wore a white shirt, black pants, no makeup. The bruises under my eyes had faded a little. I wanted people to see the truth, a person who had just survived an accident, not a polished version made to be pitied. I held the file and walked into the church. My father was sitting in the front row. When he turned and saw me, his eyes lit up, and he waved proudly, as if he was telling everyone, "That's my daughter, my miracle." I waved back. A small wave, very calm, because in just a few minutes, everyone in that room would see a completely different Victor Carter. The church that day was as crowded as every month. Long folding tables arranged across the hall, trays of baked pasta, salad, coffee, the sound of children running back and forth, warm, familiar, exactly like a small American community where everyone knows each other. And at the center of it all, as always, was my father. Victor Carter, the model deacon, the man who often helped fix pipes for free, the one who shook hands with everyone after service, the one the pastor mentioned in sermons as an example of faith and sacrifice. He stood in front of the microphone, his voice steady, and said, "Today I want to share something very personal. My youngest daughter, Emma, just went through a terrible accident. She was in a coma for 3 weeks. The doctors thought we might lose her." He paused at exactly the right moment. He was very good at pauses. Then he looked toward me. "But God is merciful. Today she is here." People turned around. There was applause. Some placed their hands on their chest. Some smiled at me with sympathy. My father continued, his voice perfectly choked with emotion. "As a father, there is nothing more painful than the feeling of almost losing your child. I prayed beside her every night. I never left her bedside." I heard that sentence, like hearing a lock inside me click open. I never left her bedside. A lie big enough, beautiful enough, holy enough that the whole room believed it immediately. Then he ended with a sentence that, after hearing it, made me feel more amused than hurt. Family is everything. That is what I have always taught my children. He looked at me, slightly opening his arms as if waiting for me to walk up and hug him in front of everyone's emotion. I smiled. Then I walked up. Dad. May I say a few words? He could not refuse. Not in front of hundreds of people who had just heard him call me his miracle. Of course, my dear. He handed me the microphone, still smiling, still believing he controlled the stage. I held the microphone. I did not look at him immediately. I looked at the room first. Thank you everyone for praying for me. Truly, I am grateful to still be alive and standing here today. But I need to correct one thing my father just said. The entire room went silent very quickly. My father was not by my bedside every night. The smile on his face paused slightly. He came to the hospital exactly once, on the night of the accident. But he did not go to my hospital room first. He went to the financial department first. The atmosphere in the room began to change. I could hear chairs shifting, someone placing a cup down. He asked the doctor how much my surgery would cost. And when he was told the amount, he said this is recorded exactly in the hospital's internal report. Just let her go. We will not pay for the surgery. She has been a financial burden on this family since the day she was born. A silence fell. Heavy. Thick. I continued. Clearly. After that, my father signed a do not resuscitate order for his own daughter. A woman in the front covered her mouth. Someone behind inhaled sharply. My father stepped forward. Emma, stop, you don't understand. I turned to him. I'm not finished, Dad. He immediately changed strategy. This is not the place to talk about private family matters. I looked straight into his eyes. You use this church to lie. I'm just using the same place to tell the truth. That sentence froze the entire room. Then the hall door opened. Adrian Cole walked in, holding a file in his hand. He walked straight forward, calm in a way that was terrifying. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I saw him truly panic. I introduced, this is Adrian Cole, my grandmother Jasmine's personal lawyer. The moment her name was spoken, the whole room stirred. Grandmother Jasmine had sat in this church for 30 years. Everyone knew her. I continued. My grandmother left the house in Willow Creek and her savings to me alone, according to a legal will that was confirmed by the court months ago. My father did not know this because she did not trust him. My father opened his mouth, but before he could interrupt, I continued. While I was in a coma, my father forged my signature on a power of attorney, transferred the house into his name, then used it to take out a $280,000 mortgage. This time, it was not just silence. There was the sound of something dropping at the back of the hall, a fork hitting the floor with a sharp clink. And I knew, at that moment, the image of a perfect father he had worn for more than a decade had been completely torn apart. My father almost growled each word. That is a lie. Adrian opened his briefcase, took out the original will, and held it up just enough for those sitting nearby to see the notary seal. His voice was calm. I am the one who directly prepared this will for Mrs. Jasmine Carter. The property in Willow Creek was left solely to Emma Carter. The name Victor Carter does not appear in this document. I looked toward Daniel. My brother stood frozen at the table on the right, his face pale. I did not know how much he knew. But I knew one thing. He no longer had the courage to look me in the eye. My father turned to the whole room, trying to pull back the last bit of authority he still had. She is still weak, still on medication. From the back row, a man spoke up. If that's true, then why is there a lawyer here, Victor? No one laughed. The pastor stood near the coffee table, his voice very soft but clear enough. Victor, perhaps we should listen to everything. My father changed his tone again. His shoulders slumped, his eyes reddened, just like all the times he played the role of a father exhausted from sacrificing for his family. I have carried too much. Emma's medical expenses since childhood nearly collapsed this family. I only did the best I could. I cut him off. My voice was not loud, but it cut very clean. No, Dad, you only did the cheapest thing. The entire room seemed frozen. He clenched his teeth. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Debts, everything. He stopped halfway, because he almost admitted his gambling debt. I saw Daniel shift slightly. Then he turned his face away. I knew that at that moment, Another truth was forming in many people's minds. This was not just about hospital bills, and not just a decision made in panic. This was greed with preparation. A family secret hidden under a layer of morality for years. I stepped fully forward. I did not need the microphone anymore. The room was so silent that I believed even someone at the back could hear every word clearly. I am not here to destroy my father. I am here because he tried to let me die, and when that failed, he took my house. I turned toward everyone. You deserve to know the truth. Because for 15 years, he has stood right here telling you who he is. Then I looked straight at Victor Carter. Now I will tell you what happens next. I took the file from Adrian. The petition to the court to cancel the fraudulent transfer was filed yesterday. His face hardened. The bank that issued the loan has been notified that the property is under legal dispute. The loan has been frozen. His left hand trembled slightly. I have also submitted documents to the police regarding forgery and financial fraud. The notary involved is included. He whispered, almost voiceless. Are you trying to send me to prison? I had never spoken as clearly as I did at that moment. You signed papers to let me die, so don't ask that question as if you are the one who was betrayed. Somewhere, a child quietly asked their mother what was happening, then was pulled to sit down. Adrian closed his briefcase. This is no longer a matter for negotiation, Mr. Carter. My father looked around the room. He searched for something he had always had. Allies, respect, sympathetic eyes. But this time, there was none. No one stepped forward. No one put a hand on his shoulder. No one said, "There must be a misunderstanding." No one. Finally, he sat down heavily on the edge of the nearest table, as if he had aged 10 years in just a few minutes. Another deacon walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder not gently but firmly. "Victor, perhaps you should go home." He stood up and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back to look at me. His eyes were red, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to say one last sentence, a sentence to save something, a final roll. But no words came out. He left. I put the microphone down. My chest hurt. My ribs hurt. My legs were still weak, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel small. An elderly woman with silver hair touched my hand afterward. She introduced herself as Eleanor Bennett, a longtime friend of my grandmother, Jasmine. She held my hand tightly. "Jasmine talked about you every week. She was very proud of you." I almost cried again. My entire childhood, I thought I was invisible in my father's world. But it turned out my grandmother had left traces of her love everywhere. I just did not truly see them until that day. Within 24 hours, the walls my father had built for years began to collapse. On Monday morning, the bank froze the mortgage. The fraud department called Adrian before noon. When they discovered signs of forgery, they immediately suspended the file. My father could no longer access the money, could not sell the house, could not refinance, and most of the money he had already withdrawn had disappeared because of gambling debt. That same afternoon, he received a court notice. The police officially opened an investigation. The notary became frightened, hired a lawyer, and began cooperating. That meant my father no longer had anyone protecting him. On Tuesday evening, the church board asked him to step down from his deacon role. Clients who used to hire him for plumbing began canceling appointments. Rumors spread faster than any sermon. People could overlook temper, overlook boasting, even overlook debt. But signing papers to let your daughter die and stealing your mother's house? No, that was not something anyone could accept. My father called me that night. His voice was empty. "You destroyed me." I sat on Olivia's sofa, holding a warm compress against my ribs, looking out the window, and replied, "No, Dad, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped covering for you." He hung up. 3 days later, Daniel called. It was the hardest call to listen to after everything. He said as soon as I answered, "Emma, I need to tell the truth." I stayed silent. That night, I was at the hospital. I knew what Dad would do. I didn't stop him. I closed my eyes. "And the house?" He breathed heavily. "I knew about that too. Dad promised to give me a share if I stayed quiet." I did not shout. I did not cry. I only asked, "And you stayed quiet?" "Yes." His voice broke. "All my life I've been afraid of Dad. You know that. I know it's not a valid reason. Correct, it's not." He cried the kind of chaotic crying of someone facing themselves for the first time with nowhere left to hide. I once thought that if Daniel ever regretted it, I would feel satisfied. But I didn't. I just felt tired. Tired of a lifetime of being placed behind him. Tired of swallowing hurt silently at every dinner. Tired of everyone knowing I was treated unfairly, but choosing convenience over speaking up. He said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I replied, "That's right. Not now." After a moment, I added, "But if one day you truly want to become a better person, don't start with tears. Start with responsibility." He stayed silent for a long time, then said softly, "Grandma also left me a letter." I looked up. "What did she say?" He answered, almost whispering. She wrote, "Daniel, you are more like your father than you think. Choose differently before it's too late." I said nothing, because my grandmother had seen all of us clearly a long time ago. A month later, the court canceled the fraudulent transfer. The house returned to my name. Adrian called that morning. "You should thank Jasmine." I smiled through tears. I knew. My father accepted a plea deal to avoid a heavier sentence. Not because he regretted it, but because the evidence was clear. He sold his house to repay debts, but it was not enough. Then he moved to stay with a relative somewhere else. I did not investigate further. I no longer needed to know every detail of his collapse, because from the moment he signed the paper to let me die, he was no longer a place I could return to. At the end of October, I drove to Willow Creek alone. The air was cool. Yellow leaves stuck to the porch steps. The old swing still creaked like before. The garden was more overgrown, but the scent of lavender was still in the air. I stood at the door for a long time before unlocking it. It was my key, my house, not something I earned by being recognized, not a reward for enduring long enough, but something a woman loved me enough and wisely enough to protect for me even when she was no longer here. I opened the door. The scent of lavender and old wood rushed out as if the house was still breathing in my grandmother's rhythm. The photo of the two of us was still on the fireplace. We were sitting on the porch, squinting in the sunlight, smiling a very real smile, the kind you only have when you are with someone who does not make you feel like you need to defend yourself. I walked in and closed the door behind me. No one called my name. No judging eyes. No feeling that I had to walk lightly to avoid being a burden. I sat down in her rocking chair, did not turn on the TV, did not pick up my phone, did not try to fill the silence, just sat. And for the first time in my life, I realized something very simple that I had never had before. I did not have to apologize for being alive. At the end of October, I drove to Willow Creek by myself. The air was cool. Yellow leaves stuck to the steps of the front porch. The old swing still creaked like before. The garden was a bit more overgrown than before, but the scent of lavender was still somewhere in the wind. I stood in front of the door for a long time before inserting the key. That was my key. My house. Not something I gained by being recognized by someone. Not a reward for having endured long enough, but something that a woman loved me wisely enough to protect for me. Even when she was no longer here, I opened the door. The smell of lavender and old wood rushed out, as if the house was still breathing in the rhythm of my grandmother Jasmine. The photo of the two of us was still on the fireplace. We were sitting on the porch, squinting in the sunlight, smiling in a very real way. The kind of smile you only have when you are with someone who does not make you feel like you have to be on guard. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. No one called my name. No one looked at me with judgment. No feeling that I had to step lightly so I would not bother anyone. I sat down in the rocking chair she used to sit in, did not turn on the TV, did not pick up my phone, did not try to do anything to fill the emptiness. Just sat, and for the first time in my life, I realized something very simple that I had never had before. I did not have to apologize for being alive. After everything, many people asked me, "What changed you the most?" Not that Sunday at church, not when my father was investigated, not when the house returned to me, but the moment I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. Setting boundaries is not revenge. It is survival. For many years, I thought being a good daughter meant enduring, absorbing every hurtful word, every feeling of guilt that others placed on me, and still smiling, still being grateful, still staying. I was wrong. Loving your family does not mean you have to hand your life over for others to crush. Family is not a place where you are reminded that you are costly. Family is not a place where you have to pay the price for being born. And love has never been something that makes you disappear so others feel comfortable. I no longer hate my father. Not because he deserves forgiveness, but because I no longer want him to have the power to control my emotions for even one more second. He is just a man who made the wrong choices, choosing money over his child, choosing silence over honesty, choosing image over conscience. That does not erase what he did, but it helps me understand something very important. I do not need to carry the consequences of those choices for him. There is a truth I wish I had understood earlier. Not everyone has the courage to love you the right way. And that is not your fault. You do not need to shrink yourself to fit someone else's limits. You do not need to spend your entire life proving that you are worthy. And you certainly do not need to repay love with your own life. After everything, I returned to work. Light shifts. The first days still painful. Steps still slow. Evelyn only handed me the schedule and said, "Welcome back, Emma. No questions, no pity, no making it a big deal. Just a simple sentence, but enough for me to know that I still had a place in this world." Olivia was still there, still silent in the way she always loved, without reminding, without demanding, without turning help into a debt. Daniel was still standing outside the door. I did not close it, but I did not open it either. Some relationships, if they want to return, must come back as a different person, not the same version that once hurt you. I still go to church, but a different one. Smaller, warmer, fewer people, and this time, I sit in the front row. Not to be seen, but because I no longer want to live at the back of my own life. Perhaps this is the true ending of this story. Not when a man loses everything, but when a woman stops believing that she is not worthy of love. If you ask me what the biggest family secret in all of this is, then maybe it is this. The thing that kills you the fastest is not always an accident, illness, or money. Sometimes, the thing that kills you the slowest is believing the words that make you feel like you have no value. I used to believe I was a burden. My grandmother Jasmine was the only one who never let me believe that. And in the end, I learned to believe her instead of believing fear. This story is not for you to hate anyone, not for you to stand up against your family, but to remind you of one very important thing. Kindness begins with how you treat yourself. If you do not protect yourself, someone will see it as the right to hurt you. If you stay silent for too long, someone will think you have no voice. And if you forget your value, someone will be ready to rewrite it in a way that benefits them. So, if today you are listening to this story and see a part of yourself in it, I just want to tell you, you are not a burden. You are not a debt. And you do not need to hurt yourself. Live kindly, but do not live in submission. Love deeply. And if needed, start again. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not to endure any longer, but to stop and choose differently.